Rain slicked the Oregon asphalt the way grief slicks memory thin, reflective, hiding what's beneath. Near midnight, a small car cut through the dark, its headlights trembling over fir trees and tracked homes and the quiet routines of people already asleep. Inside that car were 3 children. On the driver's side, a young mother gripped the wheel, breathing hard, telling herself to keep going, keep moving, get to the hospital. Sirens hadn't started yet. No one knew. The night still belonged to the crickets. At the emergency bay doors, floodlights burned away the darkness. Nurses ran. Doors burst open. The smell of metal and medicine collided with the iron weight of blood. A gurney squealed, then another. Hands pressed chest, airway, gauze. A doctor's voice dropped an octave the way voices do when the truth has already arrived. Somewhere in that frantic echo, a mother said she had been ambushed on a lonely road by a stranger who wanted her car. He stepped out of the shadows, she said. He pointed a gun, she said. He fired, she said, and she fought to save her children. A story like that lands like a stone in a calm river. It ripples outward into squad rooms and living rooms, into newsrooms hungry for a narrative that makes sense of senselessness. A mother, a road, a man with a gun. It is every parent's nightmare, framed so cleanly you can recite it without breathing. But even as the words left her mouth, the room noticed what rooms notice. The measured cadence, the composure that seemed rehearsed, the wound on the woman's arm that bled but did not scream. Grief has a sound. Shock has a temperature. Something in the air wasn't matching the thermostat. Outside, the rain tapered to a mist. Inside, a child's heartbeat faltered and did not return. Another clung to life. The third lay still beneath a sheet drawn too carefully, as if gentleness could undo what bullets. Cameras would come. Headlines would arrive. The mother would face them with a poise that felt like a riddle no one wanted to solve. Because if the road wasn't the danger, if the stranger wasn't the threat, then the terror lived closer than anyone was prepared to admit. What if the person who told the story was the only one who needed it to be true? Before the sirens and the headlines, before her name became a synonym for betrayal, Diane Downs was the image of ordinary. A 7-year-old mother of 3, living in the quiet suburbs of Springfield, Oregon, blonde hair, wide smile, the kind of person who could pass you in the grocery store aisle and leave no impression except a polite nod. To neighbors, she was friendly, hardworking, doing her best. To her family, she was complicated. Born Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson, she grew up in Arizona under a strict religious father and a mother who preached obedience. Diane wanted freedom, not the quiet kind, but the kind that made people look at her. At 14, she wrote in her diary about being different, about wanting to be seen, and that desire to be noticed, adored, chosen would follow her all her life like a shadow that never slept. She married Steve Downs, her high school sweetheart, at 18. He was steady, simple, not the kind of man who understood the storm beneath her calm. The marriage fractured under money problems, jealousy, and Diane's affairs. She called herself unlucky in love, but in truth, she needed more than love. She needed attention, a mirror reflecting her best version back at her. When Steve finally left, Diane didn't collapse. She reinvented herself the single working mother, juggling shifts at the U.S. Postal Service, driving her little car with 3 children in the backseat, Cheryl, Christy, and Danny. To coworkers, she laughed loudly, joked easily, and flirted shamelessly. But behind the laughter, there was exhaustion and obsession. Because around this time, Diane met a man named Robert Knickerbocker, a co-worker from Arizona, already married, already off limits. He was charming, confident, and most importantly didn't belong to her, which, in Diane's mind, made him irresistible. Robert was clear. I'll never leave my wife, Diane. I don't want kids. To most people, that would end the affair. But Diane wasn't most people. She heard something else entirely a challenge. She began to write him letters, dozens of them, full of fantasy, longing, and desperation. She dreamed of a life where it was just the two of them. No obstacles, no distractions, no children. Every word she wrote tightened the thread between desire and delusion. Friends noticed her talking more about Robert, less about her kids. Her coworkers said she'd drift into daydreams, staring out at nothing, smiling to herself. In her mind, the perfect life was almost within reach. She only had to remove the things that kept her from it. The world before the crime wasn't peaceful. It was a pressure cooker disguised as a happy home. And on that spring night in 1983, when the Oregon sky turned black and the road emptied before her, Diane Downs decided she was ready to rewrite her story, even if it meant erasing the people who were in it. It was the 19th of May, 1983. The air in Springfield, Oregon hung still and heavy, the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. At around 10:48 p.m., a red Nissan Pulsar sped toward Mackenzie Willamette Hospital. Its horn blared through the night. Nurses ran to the emergency bay as the car screeched to a halt. Inside were 3 children. Cheryl, 7 years old, motionless. Christy, 8, barely breathing, a wound to her chest. Danny, 3, paralyzed from a bullet that had shattered her spine. And behind the wheel their mother, Diane Downs, with a bandaged arm and a voice that never seemed to tremble. "We were just driving home," she said, "and this man, he stepped out of the darkness. He wanted my car. When I refused, he shot the kids, and then he shot me." A story simple enough to believe, at least at first. The police arrived within minutes. They took her statement. A composite sketch of the so-called bushy-haired stranger went out to the press. But even as the flyers were printed, something didn't feel right. The first red flag was her calm. While doctors fought to save Christy's life, Diane laughed with a nurse about how much she hated hospitals. One officer noted she seemed oddly cheerful, talkative, almost proud to tell her story. The second red flag was the evidence. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints. The car window, which Diane claimed the man had reached through, was rolled down just enough for someone on the inside to fire a gun. And her wound? A clean, shallow graze to the left forearm, self-inflicted, the doctors suspected. Investigators retraced her route. She said she'd driven as fast as she could to the hospital. Yet every witness they found, from the farmer on Old Mohawk Road to a couple walking their dog, reported seeing her driving unusually slow, almost crawling along the shoulder. One said they saw a red car with its hazard lights flashing, but no other vehicle in sight. The story of the mysterious gunman began to fall apart, and beneath it, the cracks in Diane's world widened into a void. Still, she smiled for cameras. Within days, she was giving TV interviews, reliving the shooting in vivid detail, her tone disturbingly theatrical. "I just kept thinking, God, please let my kids be okay," she said, her eyes glancing at the camera lens like an actress hitting her mark. "But you can't change what's meant to be." What's meant to be, 3 words that echoed like a confession no one wanted to acknowledge. As her surviving daughter Christy lay in a coma, police obtained a warrant to search Diane's home. Inside, they found love letters addressed to Robert Knickerbocker, the married man from Arizona letters, where she wrote of wanting to be free of responsibilities so they could finally be together. One of them ended with the words, "The kids are the only thing standing in our way." The case had turned. The image of a victimized mother was unraveling, thread by thread, revealing something darker underneath a woman whose love had a price and whose fantasy demanded blood. For weeks, the hospital room where Christy Downs lay was quiet except for the hum of machines. Her body was small beneath the white sheets, lungs stitched by a. Doctors weren't sure she would ever wake up, but the investigators waited, because if she did, she might be the only voice left to tell what really happened that night. Outside, her mother smiled for cameras. Diane gave interviews on national television, the bandage on her arm like a badge of survival. She reenacted the shooting for reporters, her tone almost flirtatious. When asked if she felt anger toward the man who had shot her children, she laughed softly. "No, I wasn't angry. Anger doesn't solve anything," she said. "It was fate. It had to happen." Her smile didn't tremble once. Viewers across America stared at their screens in disbelief. Something about her voice, that calm, measured rhythm, made people uneasy. It wasn't the voice of a grieving mother. It was the voice of someone enjoying the performance. Detectives kept digging. They traced the .22 caliber handgun used in the shooting to one Diane had once owned the same type of weapon her ex-lover, Robert Knickerbocker, confirmed she'd brought to Arizona months before. He told investigators Diane had become obsessed, threatening his wife, promising they'd be together no matter what stood in the way. When he ended the affair, she didn't cry. She simply said, "You'll see how much I love you." Then came the break. Christy woke up, slowly, confused, terrified. At first, doctors kept her shielded from questions. Her speech was slurred from trauma. But weeks later, when she was strong enough, Detectives sat beside her hospital bed with quiet voices and kind eyes. "Christy," one of them asked gently, "do you remember what happened that night?" The little girl blinked. Tears filled the corners of her eyes. She nodded. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Mom was driving." Another pause. "Who had the gun?" Christy swallowed, her small chest rising. "Mom did." The words hit like thunder. They didn't shout. They didn't press her further. They simply let the silence confirm what the evidence had been screaming all along. Christy's testimony became the heart of the prosecution's case. Her courage, a child naming her own mother as the killer, was something no adult could ignore. And when police compared her words to the timeline, the letters, and the forensics, the puzzle locked into place. The bushy-haired stranger never existed. The monster wasn't out there in the dark. She had been in the driver's seat the entire time. On the 28th of February 1984, Diane Downs was arrested for murder and attempted murder. Reporters waited outside the courthouse as she was led away in handcuffs, chin lifted, eyes defiant, almost proud. When asked by a journalist if she had anything to say, Diane smiled again. "You're wrong," she said softly. "I didn't do it. My children know that." But one of them already had, and her voice had shattered the illusion forever. By the spring of 1984, the courthouse in Eugene, Oregon had become a stage. Cameras waited outside. Reporters rehearsed their intros. Inside, the woman at the center of it all, Diane Downs, walked through the doors in pastel dresses and bright lipstick, flashing smiles to the jury as if she were arriving at a cocktail party. She waved at photographers. She joked with the guards. The same woman accused of 3 children now looked directly into the lenses and said, "You'll all see the truth. I'm not worried." But truth doesn't bend a charm. It waits, patiently. And in that courtroom, it was waiting for her. The prosecution began with the letters to Robert Knickerbocker, pages filled with fantasy, obsession, and a desire to be free. They showed the jury the ballistics evidence. The bullet Cheryl and paralyzed Danny came from a .22 caliber pistol, identical to the one Diane had owned. They called witnesses who'd seen her car creeping slowly down Old Mohawk Road, not racing for help, but stalling for time. And then they called the one witness who couldn't be rehearsed. Christy Downs, now 9 years old, entered the courtroom. She was small, fragile, clutching a teddy bear. The same chest that had been touched by her mother's bullet rose and fell under the courtroom's fluorescent light. The prosecutor approached gently. "Christy, do you remember what happened the night your family was hurt?" The girl hesitated, glancing at Diane. Diane smiled at her, the same soft, rehearsed smile that had fooled the world for months. Christy's voice trembled. "Mom stopped the car. She got out. Then she came to my side. No one breathed. The silence after her words was heavier than any verdict. When it was Diane's turn to testify, she took the stand with confidence, spinning stories of innocence, tears appearing on cue, tone calibrated perfectly. But the performance cracked. Her answers drifted into contradictions. Her smiles at the jury became too frequent, her laughter too loud. The prosecutor looked at her and said, "You say you loved your children, Miss Downs?" "Of course I did," she replied. "Then why did you?" She smiled. "I didn't, but if I had, I wouldn't tell you." The courtroom froze. Even the judge looked up from his notes. That line, that chilling hint of arrogance, was the moment everything shifted. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury returned. They found Diane Downs guilty of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison plus 50 years, without the possibility of parole for 25. But before the sentencing, something else happened, something that made the nation gasp. While awaiting trial, Diane had become pregnant by a new man, a mail carrier, who had visited her during the investigation. She later told a psychiatrist that she wanted to prove she could be a good mother again. To everyone else, it looked like one last attempt to manipulate sympathy to control the narrative even as it collapsed around her. The newspapers called her the smiling mother, the narcissistic killer, a woman who thought love was possession. But inside the courtroom, when the judge read the sentence, Diane's expression didn't change. No tears, no regret, only that same quiet defiance, as if she still believed she could outsmart the world. "You have shown no remorse," the judge said. "You are a dangerous person, and you will remain in prison for the rest of your natural life." And with that, the doors closed behind her. The smile finally disappeared, not because she felt guilt, but because there was no one left to see it. Years passed, but the echo of that night on Old Mohawk Road never truly faded. It lived in whispers, in the steady breathing of a child who survived, in the rustle of letters tucked into evidence files, in the cold air of a prison cell where Diane Downs still told herself she was innocent. Behind concrete walls, Diane thrived in her own strange way. She gave interviews, wrote letters to reporters, and filed endless appeals. In one televised segment, she smiled into the camera and said, "They've got it all wrong. My kids know I didn't do it." But the world had moved on except for the one she left behind. Christy Downs, the little girl who had looked her mother in the eye and told the truth, was adopted by the district attorney who prosecuted the case. She grew up quietly, far from the spotlight, carrying scars the world could not see. For years, she struggled with nightmares, the sound of her mother's face illuminated by the flash. Yet she built a life anyway, one grounded in resilience, not revenge. Danny Downs, paralyzed from the waist down, also survived. Doctors said his injuries were permanent, but his will to live was stronger. He learned to adapt, to smile again. Together, Christy and Danny became proof that survival is not the absence of pain, it's the decision to keep breathing despite it. Then there was Rebecca Babcock, the child Diane conceived while awaiting trial. She was adopted at birth and grew up not knowing who her mother was. In her 20s, she discovered the truth that the woman who gave her life had taken life from others. Rebecca once said in an interview, "I spent years wondering if I was like her, if darkness can be inherited." But she wasn't. She became a nurse, a mother, and an advocate for trauma survivors, living proof that evil does not pass through blood, only through choice. As for Diane, she remains in prison, still writing, still insisting she's the victim of a conspiracy. In every parole hearing, she repeats the same refrain, "I didn't do it." And every time, the board denies her release, because some truths don't need to be proven again. If you drive down Old Mohawk Road today, it looks like any other stretch of Oregon highway, calm, green, silent. But for those who know, the air there feels heavier. It's the kind of place where you can almost hear the past breathing, whispering its warning. Some monsters don't hide under the bed. Sometimes they drive the car. Fade to black.